Peter R. Breggin, MD, is called the conscience of psychiatry for his many decades of successful reform efforts. His scientific and educational work provide the foundation for modern criticism of drugs and ECT and lead the way in promoting more caring and effective therapies. His books include Talking Back to Prozac, Toxic Psychiatry, Medication Madness, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, and now, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming Negative Emotions. Welcome to the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour.
Hello, my wonderful audience. This is a special day for me. I'm going to be talking to you by myself, and I'm going to be trying to communicate to you the basics of what I know about anxiety. It can be anxiety about the coronavirus. It can be anxiety about global warming. It can be political anxiety. Maybe you have anxiety about Trump or Bernie Sanders. It can be anxiety that's rooted in being in Tornado Alley. It can be any kind of anxiety because anxiety is the same regardless of its roots. And before we're done, I'm going to hope to get to the real roots of anxiety and for the simple things you can do to manage anxiety. Anxiety can also be caused by things that are silly or trivial or routine. It can be caused by driving. Some people have driving anxiety. Some people have anxieties leaving the house. Some people have anxieties about going to the doctor. Some people have anxieties about whether they have the right tie on or the right dress on or where are their shoes in the morning. Anxieties can come from the tiniest things. They come from ghosts, imagining ghosts. It can come from being afraid to go to sleep at night, insomnia. Anxieties can come from the whole wide range of the hugest things we have to deal with. Imagine World War II. I lived near the coast of Long Island. We were afraid of bombing. We were afraid of being shelled by submarines. And we saw debris as children from the many, many sinking of our ships out at sea off the coast of Long Island. So anxiety can be there from anything large or small. It can afflict you at any age, but it has some very particular characteristics that always tell us it's anxiety. And that's what I'm going to get to next with you. Occasionally, folks, I'll be referring to notes because I decided that I really wanted to cover this in the best possible way today. You deserve to get the best I can offer you about this whole issue of what in the world is anxiety about. I'm going to start out with making a statement that may seem outrageous or it may immediately seem sensible, but it's a statement, an observation that I'm not just going to state to you, I'm going to then build up to your having a better understanding of it. Anxiety is never real. Its true basis is never in reality. Anxiety always comes from something earlier that we don't understand, cannot fathom, cannot recall, don't want to deal with. It is never the hurricane. It is never even losing control of your car when a deer steps in front of you. Some people don't lose control when a deer steps in front. Some people immediately go into, don't swerve. Better to hit the deer than the tree or a person or another car. Slow down as gradually as you can. Be alert. Make all the best moves that you can. I'm smiling now because I'm hearing a woodpecker knocking on the bird feeder on my window, my big bay window out at the end of the office. And I'm wondering, can you hear that? If you're hearing that, that's what you're hearing. It's probably a little tiny downy. I can't see it. So anxiety can come out of the blue. It can be a woodpecker banging on your window. It's never real. It's like believing in ghosts. I hear a ghost. It's never real. even if there's a tornado coming. It always feels compelling. It always feels real. The person who thinks they're dying of a heart attack at the moment, pounding in the chest and sweating, is certain it's real, will argue with you, or more likely his wife or kids or whoever else, that it is real. But when it's anxiety, it's almost never real. Now, could there be a coincidence? You have anxiety about a heart attack and you're having one? Remotely possible. But the odd thing is, I can tell you this as a physician, I think most cardiologists would agree with me. Generally speaking, if people are really having a heart attack, they have fear and they say, I think I may be having a heart attack. Get me to the office, to the doctor's office or to the emergency room. When it's anxiety, it has a particular quality to it. It's about something else. Now, if you can remember this, the next time you feel overwhelmed by thinking about a virus coming into the neighborhood, disrupting your lives. In my case, I'm an older person. I'd be very, very, open to the risk of a virus coming into the Ithaca community. Keep in mind that it's not real. It's different from a fear, which identifies something and you take action about. For example, in terms of the coronavirus, we're taking a bunch of measures. I may get to talk to you about that as we go along. Some people think, that they have to feel anxiety when they're going to give a speech. They take medications just to be able to give a speech. For other people, it may be before an athletic event. Many people get anxious before an athletic event. Some people get anxious going to work. It's never about what it seems, or it wouldn't have the qualities of anxiety. If it was a genuine fear, you'd be thinking about it rationally, maybe even lovingly, thinking about what you can do to help out in a situation that's making you afraid. Maybe you'd be thinking about other people who might be afraid. There are people, for example, who deal with what would make other people anxious all the time. Soldiers in combat. They may get anxious, but then they get their act together. They figure out what to do. They stay in touch with their buddies if they're going to function properly. And then instead of anxiety, they may have fear, but they are thinking clearly. The key to anxiety, to begin with, is that it's an expression of emotional helplessness. It's a giving up. It's a surrender. It's an I quit. It's help, rescue me. It's please take care of me. It's a baby's cry, an adult giving off a baby's cry. This cannot be overemphasized. Sometimes when I'm talking with my clients for the first time, or my patients, one of the reasons I like to call people clients is patients is like a more helpless role. Just being a patient's a kind of helpless role. People get anxious about being patients. They should be afraid, not anxious. They should have concerns about how they're going to be treated as patients. But anxiety is different. Anxiety makes us feel helpless. It's not just a fear response. It's an overwhelming, emotional giving up, time to surrender. We can't think straight. I'll describe it to my patients if I feel I can do it without being insulting. I'll say, as I've experienced it, we're emotionally dumb. When you've had these anxiety attacks, don't you feel dumb, like there's nothing you can do? Doom is impending. So you see, people can have full-blown doom is impending anxiety attacks, and there's no hurricane, there's no doom. It's a sense, it's a fear. Keep that in mind the next time you think, no, I have to be anxious here. Actually, anxiety can strike you over nothing perceptible. That's when people, often end up taking psychiatric drugs, medications, which only can make anxiety worse because the brain fights any medication. And eventually, if you take an anxiety medication, after a few doses, Sometimes after really just a few, your brain's rebounding and your anxiety is getting worse. The best way to deal with anxiety, I believe, is by finding ways to deal with it, to manage it, to think about it, to conceptualize it. So, anxiety clinically takes a lot of different forms. We talk about panic disorder, we talk about OCD. People get so anxious about not turning off the stove, or so anxious that they may have hit somebody with a car that they become just obsessed with it and they can't get rid of it. It can just show up in constant nervousness, insomnia, commonly caused by anxiety. And as I mentioned earlier, the heart attacks, cancer, people can become anxious about almost anything. But remember, this model of kind of perfect classical clinical anxiety, you feel doomed, you feel like you can't explain it. And I've had this. I had a great deal of it when I was young. Not much anymore. So anxiety makes you just, you don't know what to do. Melt, scream, look for help. Identify it immediately by these signs of the helplessness, the overwhelm, the emotional stupidity, the inability to focus, to think straight, to love, to do anything that's a higher function. And getting back to higher functioning is always going to be one of the biggest keys there is to overcoming, to getting over anxiety. So helplessness, the feeling of helplessness, is the whole key here. So I'm calling the show Epidemic Anxiety because of the coronavirus. It's the anxiety that's becoming epidemic, not just the coronavirus. Now, just to show you that I do think the coronavirus is real, we're already taking measures about it. I don't have a lot of anxiety about the coronavirus, not because I don't think it couldn't be a very serious problem. I think that's possible. Don't know the answer. I'm not sure anybody knows for sure how much we can protect ourselves here in America. It's already a dreadful occurrence in China, and it's a dreadful occurrence in Italy and Iran and some other places now. So it's a very serious issue. And we're taking corrective measures. My wife, who's very good at this, tends to handle these things. And I recommend you go on to the CDC website and learn about what you can do. But we're stocked up on food, good food, for several weeks, and nourishment to survive for months. We have that much backup. My wife always keeps a backup, so we didn't have to add a lot to it. We're backed up on water, and we're also backed up on things to purify water with, because we have easy enough access in Ithaca, New York, to water. Everybody can find water, if not in their backyard like we do. They can find it somewhere nearby in Ithaca, and natural water. So you need stuff to fix it up with. We have masks. I think they've run out of masks now, retail and on the internet, but we have some masks saved up. And because we think about these things, we have medications saved up, and we've just tried to make sure we have enough medications for a period of time. I mean, everybody has to judge. I think CDC says 2 weeks or something, but it could last a long time. And I can see ourselves going into quarantine, for example, just to let you know. Instead of anxiety, we're thinking about it. The opposite of anxiety is when you start thinking in a caring and thoughtful way about yourself and other people. So we are thinking about, all the ways to take care of each other, and also to stay in touch with the people who work for us. I've already thought about, well, what if PRN in New York City has to shut down? I can continue this TV part of the show as long as the internet's up. I can film myself and put it up on the internet. I can film myself, send it to my assistant who's in another state, my wonderful Ian, and he can edit it if necessary, but that might not be necessary. So I can keep communicating with you as long as the internet is up. I can see my patients as long as I can do FaceTime or some other method, including on Skype, the way we record this and broadcast it. I've already, when some Chinese students, I have some Chinese students at Cornell. There are many Chinese students there. These are people I'm very fond of, care a lot about. And they care about me, and we FaceTime when they got back. They didn't want to expose me. They weren't under any rules about not coming off the hill down to Ithaca to see me, but they suggested FaceTiming until they'd been here a while, and we did that. So there are ways, if you think about it, to handle a great deal of what's going to go on with the coronavirus if it reaches real epidemic proportions here in the United States, or if you're listening in another country. I mean, you could be listening to me here in China if they'd let you. So taking measures is one of the important things to do in terms of an anxiety that has an obvious stimulant, an obvious cause or agitator out there. But a lot of people will get an anxiety and not be able to think things through, not be able to sit there while I'm talking right now and say to yourself, well, Peter actually forgot this or that. Maybe I'll try to send him a communication about that. I certainly want thinking for yourself about additional things you can do. I didn't mention learning new social ways of greeting each other on the street now, or tapping shoes, or just saying hello and not shaking hands if this thing becomes of epidemic proportions, not going into large crowds, and so on and so forth. So I've been thinking a lot about it. It's real. But other people are going into more panicky kinds of conditions, and I apologize for reaching down for notes. I do want to see that I cover a lot of important information here. So when we get anxiety, it becomes important to understand that you won't get anywhere by thinking about the source. You won't get anywhere with your anxiety by looking at all that you think Donald Trump may do or Bernie Sanders may do. You won't get over your anxiety by thinking about how terrible the coronavirus might be, unless you're actually thinking about it rationally, to think about how you can handle the most terrible potential aspects of the coronavirus, like stocking up on medications and things like that. Maybe getting in some medical books that you can read. Maybe even thinking, get a store of information on the virus in case even the internet breaks down. I know firsthand that the worst anxieties a person can face are handleable if you assume that being anxious is not necessary, not useful, and shouldn't be justified by how bad things are. I remember once, they went after my medical license in 1985, and that was pretty scary. Even before that, I knew they might go after my medical license, and they might take it away when I conducted an international campaign to stop lobotomy and psychosurgery. I succeeded in stopping most of lobotomy, that is brain mutilation, psychiatric brain mutilation, some of it being done by Walter Freeman. He did 5,000, many of them by just slipping an ice pick around a person's eyes and doing a lobotomy, knock them out with electroshock and then do the lobotomy that way. And I'm not going to say anything more about that because that's the kind of stuff that can make anybody anxious, and I don't want to add anxiety-provoking things to the show. But I was under very heavy attack. My life got threatened. I had a bodyguard for a while. Now, I had to deal with a lot of anxiety in the beginning. And then later on, taking on the drug companies, and then the attack on my license, which they completely lost. It changed my career for the better. It's why I got my first really well-known book published, Toxic Psychiatry, because when they attacked me, I became a public figure under attack rather than some marginalized psychiatrist. I was now a public figure. I was being written about in the New York Times. There were people coming forward and saying they agreed with me with my critique of drugs. So the attack actually resulted in the publication of what, at the time, it doesn't seem so radical anymore. It seemed like a very radical book, Toxic Psychiatry. What I realized that the most terrifying things were feeling helpless, feeling that nothing I could do, that would make me very helpless, thinking my identity was threatened, that my identity, and this can be very important, that my identity rested on being the respected physician. I thought I was going to be the youngest psychiatrist to ever be elected president of the American Psychiatric Association. That was my trajectory from my training and my successes, early publications, and so on. I didn't expect to have a target on my back from the American Psychiatric Association. I didn't expect they'd be trying to harm me. They were very much behind the license attack because I was threatening their identity, their income and identity and authority. Well, identity is a big deal. So take a good look at your identity of something you're doing, like getting fired. You think you're going to get fired from a job, and it really becomes an identity proportions, or thrown out of your church for standing up for what you believe, or your club, or if you're younger, being ostracized by some kids around you, being bullied anywhere. You have to come back to who are you? You have to be able to say, wait, I am always going to possess myself. And there's another source of anxiety, barking dogs. That's Ginger's little dog who somehow's gotten loose and is having a little fit in the next room. You may not have heard Bella, who is the cutest thing on earth, 4 pounds with a very shrill, piercing bark. That little bark can make me anxious sometimes. Like, what's going on? A lot of things can make us anxious, but I'm talking about the big ones, threats to your identity, threats in your life. But what I found was that these threats were actually stirring up things from way, way back in my childhood. That they had to do with my place in my family. They had to do with some early negative experiences with teachers. And that I wasn't so much afraid of death. I mean, that's a blank. Death, it's over. I wasn't so much afraid when I really looked at it of losing my medical license. There are other ways to make a living. And I remember at one point when the threats were the greatest, and I thought, well, suppose what happens? I could become a lawyer. What if I couldn't become a lawyer? And I thought, all right, this is before Ginger. I could move into a small community somewhere and just make known to people that I wanted to be helpful in any way I could. That I would do odds and ends, that I'd be there to talk with you unofficially since I didn't have my license, that I could help here or there. And from what I knew of human nature, if I didn't look odd about it, pretty soon I'd find some things to do and some way to make a little money and maybe eventually establish a business or some sort of profession. Back then I wasn't thinking much about, say, coaching, which now people can do without licenses. So what I'm getting at is if you can find in your identity the sense that you can succeed, that you can find a place with other human beings where you'll be valued. This is why I always talk about reason and love, ethics, reason, and love. I found that when I really looked at the core, that, all right, they might strip me of my medical identity. They might. They might succeed in maiming or killing me. They might. But I had my solidness. Then as I learned more about love and surrounded myself over the years with people I love and who love me, some of them in the family, some of them friends, some of them around the world, that I had an identity. I had a meaningful place in the universe. By the way, it comes much more from me, and I think for most people, from their personal relationships than fame. I mean, I know I get regular information that there are just untold numbers of people who respect what I'm doing and love what I'm doing and love me. That doesn't have the impact of knowing my wife loves me, that the people that work for me love me and I love them, that my members of the family that I love my dogs. My dogs love me. Sometimes I love the other people in the family more than me. I can barely get a tail wag out of that little dog, Bella, who's so attached to Ginger. So I'm saying that one of the things you do, in addition to looking at the real things, like what can you do about the coronavirus, you look at what really matters. What's really going on here? So I want to look some more at where do these emotions come from? They don't just come from these early relationships. They come from evolution and your earliest relationships. Anxiety, I believe, and I'm not alone in this, I'm the first person perhaps to put it together in this particular talk you're hearing, but there's a lot of agreement on different parts of this. And here, this is now what's called attachment theory. It's ridiculous that it's called attachment theory or attachment psychology. It's reality about life. And the reality is that when we're infants, we are totally dependent upon one regular, familiar nurturer. By the way, not generally on 2, 3, 4, or 5. It does not actually take a village to raise a child. It takes one loving, nurturing human being, best suited, a nursing mother. That's what it takes. Absolutely, that's what it takes. One nurturing person. The husband is there to help. In the traditional family, I know there are tremendous variations on the traditional family, and let me say, I believe they can be effective. But I think the ideal is what evolution gave us, which is the maternal nursing mom with that profound attachment and closeness. Then the father's there basically in the beginning to help, and then later to become an attachment theory. Then the family, and the way we grew for, probably hundreds, maybe millions of years, when starting with us just being these two-legged little primates climbing out of trees, going way, way back, the extended family was there to support. And as far as we know, up to living in villages a mere 10,000 years ago, we were nomads, and basically a unit was not a village. That starts much more recently, maybe 10,000 years ago, that we were nomads, and the security base was the parent, the mother for the infant, or whoever took over if the mother died in childbirth or was killed or got sick. Whoever took over as the primary nurturer with the support of other people. Because I believe that the vast amount of women who become very depressed after childbirth, it's a combination of crashing hormones but lacking the support they need. Because the nursing mother, the pregnant mother, the delivering mother, the nursing mother needs tremendous support. And if the mother doesn't have it, that gets transmitted to the infant. You see the connections? The infant picks it up right away. We are that connected. And that's the beginning of anxiety and helplessness. It begins with the fact we are dependent, helpless creatures when we're tiny. That's the beginning. When you're feeling anxious, you can have a heart attack. When you're feeling terrified, standing in front of a group where you're going to speak, if you have an issue with driving, if the coronavirus or politics are making you terribly anxious, I really want you to think about what that really originates from way, way back is the disturbance in human relationship. And the odds are that what's getting stimulated by the coronavirus or by a political anxiety has to do with personal relationships, with feeling betrayed, feeling the government won't take care of the virus, being upset about how the Chinese aren't doing what they should do, not trusting your doctors. Because when there is the opposite of infancy, dependency, helplessness on the part of the little infant, when we're being adults and we're engaged and loving and reasonable with each other around us, we can live with those more distant fears, more distant betrayals, more distant broken sense of relationship and community. It all starts with the secure infant. This can help you with your anxiety just as a start, because this is where my original statement comes in, that anxiety is never real. It's never what it seems to be about, if it seems to be about anything. It never is true. It goes back to the infant experience of broken relationship, or perhaps the infant has cramps and pain and then doesn't get nurturing and support, or the nurturing and support can't overcome the pain that could lead to anxiety too in the infant, because the infant's helpless. The infant can't think, well, I'll go to the emergency room. It can't even move. Maybe not even be able to turn over yet. Get the picture? When we are feeling overwhelmed and helpless and frustrated and ready to quit and complaining about the world, complaining is always a sign of, I think, of anxiety, feeling of helplessness. Whenever we're in that place, we are drawing on those early energies. Now, when we were young, there was a purpose to feeling helpless, feeling anxious, and doing what infants do, which is cry, show distress on our faces. And all that distress means nurture, take care of, come, do for me, rescue me, save me, help me. All these, excuse my shifting around. I'm giving this talk, and it's amazing to be so glued to communicating with you that I'm realizing, my gosh, I've been like a stone. Maybe when I look at myself, I'll see myself moving. But I think it's good for me to just take a little break and talk about my own getting adjusted here. And I hope that you're as glued. I hope some of you are as glued as I am to this. I call these early emotions guilt, shame, and anxiety. And I'll mention once my book, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming Your Negative Emotions, or just negative emotions, guilt, shame, and anxiety. It's got a lot of this in it. It's a book I worked on for 40 years before I got it to where I wanted it as an academic book. Not academic. It feels too academic to me. It feels a little bit like, oh boy, I just had to say everything. But you can skim, and the style's really easy to read, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety. You can get it from Breggin.com, my website, my marvelous, rich website. You can get it off Amazon, and so on. Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety. That's the book that goes with this talk. So originally, anxiety, which, by the way, let me digress a little bit again. It's so built into us, anxiety, that it has the most basic physiological responses. I mean, shame has blushing and other signs of distress that people can recognize. Guilt can make us sluggish and slow us down and so on. But the most direct connection to the body that shows how primitive and built-in it is anxiety. I wrote papers about this. My first published papers based on animal research and literature review were on anxiety, and in particular how the symptoms of anxiety reinforce anxiety. The paper about that. So, and that's relevant because we feel anxiety. We feel the sweaty palms. We feel the tremor. We see the tremor. We feel the heart racing. We feel a thumping in our chest. We each feel anxiety differently. Pit of the stomach anxiety, cramping anxiety. You can feel it in a lot of different ways, often related to childhood experiences. It shows how primitive it is, anxiety. It's just tied into our autonomic nervous system. That's all very, very basic, primitive biology that exists in certainly in pretty much all the mammals, as far as I know. Be interesting to go back, try to figure out if the little primitive shrews that were the first mammals, we think, at least hundreds of thousands, millions of years ago, these little shrews, they were walking around under dinosaurs. That's how old we are. And I'm sure they had autonomic nervous system. They probably felt something like anxiety when they got threatened. So for us humans, the model is that all these physical things, and they happen to us, we cry, we utter sounds as infants. And the good news is that it should bring attention, because nothing rivets the primary caregiver as much as a crying child. I mean, it's just, whoa, totally riveting. I mean, you get into action when you're the primary caregiver and you hear your crying child. I mean, some psychologists have really helped ruin the experiences of women and infants by saying, let the kid cry and that kind of thing. We now know that the more attention the crying baby gets, the less they actually end up crying. The more they're let cry, the more they cry. What children need is nurturing, nursing and nurturing. You've seen Jeannie Stolzer, my friend Jeannie Stolzer, on the TV here. I think she's been on. She's going to be on very soon. Maybe not been on. She's been on the radio, and she's going to be on very soon on the TV. She helped remind me and helped re-educate me about all the stuff I once had read years ago, and which has been sort of eradicated from modern psychology, about this mother-infant bond and the sources of anxiety. So I call these emotions guilt, shame, and anxiety. Today, the focus on anxiety. Later, I'll do shows on shame and guilt, chronic anger, and numbing, those separate topics. But today it's anxiety. These I call negative legacy emotions. Also call them Stone Age emotions and primitive emotions, to just remind people you don't need them. These are not necessary. Anxiety doesn't serve you anything except to alert you that you're in danger of becoming helpless, and you better identify the fear. If there is no fear, just work on the things we're working on today about where does it come from. So these are negative legacy emotions in two ways. They're legacy of evolution. They're built into us by the evolutionary experience, so that we feel anxiety when there is a break in the communication, the nurturing with the primary parenting person, ideally a nursing person, and ideally the nursing mother. Again, I'm not saying that people can't make choices. I really believe in freedom and I believe in choices, but I believe in reality as well. And this is the ideal, the reality I'm communicating. So when this is disturbed as a child, and you have a lot of anxiety, separations, upset parents, upset primary caregiver, then you get a legacy of increased anxiety beyond what is common. So that's one of the sources of the problems with anxiety. You get too much of it, you get traumatized in childhood. The traumas can be even late in childhood. They can even be in adulthood. And then they pile on the earlier traumas that cause anxiety. Make you feel stupid, know nothing, and overwhelmed. The other problem is that anxiety, while it may get attention in infancy, gets no good attention in adulthood. So when we're out of childhood into our late late childhood and early teens, when we're adults, if we start responding with anxiety, we can't function properly because adults can't be safe from themselves. It's just not part of life. I mean, we're just not infants who can just be nurtured. We're too complicated. There are too many issues around nurturing for us. We can have a wonderful love relationship, but we have to be able to ourselves manage anxiety in order to accept the nurturing that a loving husband or wife or friend can give, or teacher or coach. Many people give us love and nurturing, minister, rabbi, therapists. Therapists should be primarily, I believe, nurturing figures. They're not doing that. They're repeating the sources of anxiety, loss, shame, and guilt. Because if you're not getting love from somebody who gets to know you well, if you don't feel like, oh, they really like me, they've heard the worst of me, they really like me, maybe even fond, maybe even love me. If you don't have that from the therapist who you're being so intimate with your feelings, should never be intimate physically or outside the sessions. So if you're not getting it, you're going to feel anxiety or guilt, shame, whatever your vulnerability is, or anger or numbness. So anxiety doesn't work in adulthood because it puts us in a pit of helplessness. We don't function. We don't think rationally. We don't work out what's the best way to handle things. We don't use our creative imaginations to figure our way out of whatever the situation is, or to understand its roots if there is no situation we can find. And other people don't respond well to anxiety. One of the things I see as a therapist all the time is my clients go and express anxiety to somebody, and the people can't handle it. It breaks relationships up if somebody goes too often and expresses anxiety to other people. And even if you have a solid marriage, it's going to just upset the person. Even if the person's a therapist, they're likely to get upset if you just present them with anxiety and helplessness. They don't know what to do, and you're not letting them do anything, because until you manage your anxiety, you can't get help. So in therapy, I try to address immediately the feelings of helplessness, even in the first session, without using embarrassing words. Helpless can be an embarrassing word at the wrong time. I just want to say, I might say, well, I want to help you gain control over things. I want to show you that you can gain control over your anxiety in this session. And if you talk to somebody in a kind and loving way, but a way that indicates you know what you're talking about, that anxiety is irrational, and if they just focus on you, look at you and talk to you, maybe look around a room, focus on reality, maybe just explain something to me about themselves, that the anxiety will begin to diminish because you're taking over your actions. You're believing that the anxiety is without reality, and instead of focusing on it, you're beginning to work your way out of it by saying, this is anxiety. And I do this all the time in first sessions with children and adults, or in the middle of a later session. And my wife and I, we help each other with anxiety using these same tools. There's nothing demeaning about this, nothing about the big doctor doing it or anything. We help each other all the time if we get anxious, by reminding ourselves about these things. And as I get more specific now, reminding each other about identifying that it's anxiety, rejecting the anxiety, and replacing it with a reasonable, ethical, loving, engaging activity and feelings. So that's the core there, just leaping a little bit ahead, that's the core. So whether you're with a friend or yourself, even if your puppy's anxious, if your dog is anxious, it comes back to engaging the dog in something meaningful. Ginger leaves the house if she leaves the Yorkie behind Bella, whom earlier I mentioned, you might have heard in the background, being anxious and barking. And you soothe Bella, you talk to Bella, you get Bella's attention, and if she lets you, You pick up Bella and you hold her like an infant, and Bella the dog calms down. Now, some dogs are too big for that. Our other dogs are too big for that. And so we get down and we hold the dog and nurture the dog and remind the dog that we're here, that there's a relationship. It's that simple. Think about it. You draw the dog away from the anxiety of the thunder and lightning, or of Ginger leaving, or of being ill. Maybe they've upchucked or they're cold. You try to attend to that, dress for their reality, but hold them, reassure them. Bring them back to a mature dog relating to you the way dogs can relate. They won't want to in the beginning. An anxious dog won't want to be ill, won't want to be petted, want to hide, skulk, show anxiety, help, I'm skulking. Then your job is to draw them out. So, summarizing just briefly, we're talking about this very, and I'm going to switch my direction a little bit here. The ultimate source of anxiety is in relationship. And that's one of the reasons why somebody with really strikingly different opinions or views, like Bernie Sanders, without getting into personal issues, like Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, can frighten us, make us anxious, because they remind us of scary relationships. Otherwise, we just think about how to deal with them. What are we going to do if Bernie's elected? Or how am I going to work against Bernie's election? Or what are we going to do if Trump's reelected? How are we going to work against his reelection? One doesn't have to get anxious, and anxiety doesn't do any good, ever. Ever, ever, ever. So it's always ultimately about that infantile relationship, which becomes a mature relationship. Any disturbance in my basic relationships, I will notice because I get anxious. Or if I'm being superficial, I get irritable and angry, because those are the superficial emotions. And then I have to think, anxious. I'm identify my anxiety. If people are together and they're reasonable and loving, they handle anything without anxiety. Think of the Titanic. There's these wonderful stories about some of the husbands and wives who decided to stay together. I think it was one famous couple. I think it was a wealthy couple. They'd had long lives together, and they decided they'd been together 30, 40 years or whatever. They told people, we're going to stay. Let other people be saved. We've lived long lives. We're satisfied. We'll stay together. We'll be loving. Well, think about the band that played. That just kept playing on instead of running. They probably had much less anxiety until the last moments, when I think anybody probably would have gotten anxious. But maybe not. I mean, some people have a deep belief in God that's always with them. That can bring great peace because it's a relationship. God becomes a personal relationship for people, gives a lot of strength. I feel that kind of strength. I won't talk about that much. That should be a separate topic, spirituality. But I feel that strength. And that helps me with many of the dangerous things that I continue to do. So think of the Titanic. Think of any of the examples you can of stories of people who stayed together, loving communities who stayed together. And the sense is that they handle life, they make the most of the last minutes, and sometimes they put their minds to surviving together as a group, and they make it through. Think of the first responders, think of soldiers, think of doctors, think of anybody who is in very anxiety-provoking situations. Now, one of the first things they do is if they're dealing with an awake person, is they reassure them. And I think that's good for the first responder or the doctor and the patient or the victim. So if you find your first responder, you find somebody in a horrendous condition, crushed legs under concrete, you reassure them. You tell them help is coming. You reassure them. It's not just reassurance, folks. It's not about false hope. It's the connection. When we connect in rational, loving, engaging ways, anxiety disappears because its earliest, most overwhelming origin is in the infant's feeling of helplessness, not getting nurturing, not having someone come when they cry, or not somehow that person being able. I mean, it's very interesting. You know, many mothers have the experience, and fathers, that mom just gets frazzled, and so the baby keeps crying. Then dad comes over, or the reverse, mom comes over, takes the baby, and the baby calms down. It's all of this. People have seen me walk into crowds where a baby's crying at one of my conferences, and mom doesn't want to leave. She's sitting there, the baby's crying, and I come over and I pick up the baby, and the baby stops crying. There's a picture of me on my Facebook that Ginger put up of that. I've actually gone in airplanes and asked, may I smile at your baby? Or maybe I just look at the baby and go, get him attention. Do that with the baby who's crying. It's very hard for them to keep crying. Get their attention, engage them. The anxiety ends. They're engaged. It's so, so important. It's so important. One of the things you teach people who have anxiety, without necessarily getting into the roots of it, who are having speaking and anxiety, and I had some for a short period of time in my life, and I figured out what it was. But during that process, I then used some of the techniques, which were engagement techniques. So I'd come into the speech, and I'd walk down to the audience and meet people. I'd say, hi, I'm Peter Breggin, I'm speaking in a few minutes. I might walk out a little bit and talk with people. I engaged, so when I went up on the stage, I wasn't frightened and alone and a little boy. As a grown man, I'd already met people, engaged people. And then I learned to look at certain people. So it's interesting. I never fully got over that anxiety because I was never as comfortable on the radio that I did for, I don't know, how many years I've done this radio show. But as soon as I knew I was on film, I could see myself even. Better yet, see somebody else, who's on with me, because I get to see them when I'm on. Or just knowing people are going to be watching me has made me better and do a better job because I'm more engaged than I was when I was on the radio and not imagining anybody engaging directly with me. Isn't that interesting? It's all about relationship. It's all about engagement. The formula, again, is identify that it's anxiety, and then bring in all this other stuff you're learning today. It's not just identifying. What it is, it's a primitive emotion. Call it a Stone Age emotion. Call it a primitive emotion. Call it a negative emotion. Negative legacy emotion, a term I use in not just my book, but a couple of scientific articles. Negative legacy emotions, going back to built-in in evolution and stimulated and formed and shaped and often made worse in infancy and childhood. Remember that. That's what it's all about. It hasn't got any reality. So identify it for what it is, not just identify it. Reject it. Say, no, you're not real. You're no more real than a ghost. You're not real. Even if it's about an epidemic or a hurricane or a war, your biggest sources of anxiety or the sense of betrayal and helplessness and hopelessness in relation to other people and what other people are doing. And hunker down, figure out what you need to do, make your local connections, but reject it and then replace it. Identify it, set it aside, replace it with reason, love, ethics, getting together with folks, doing positive things. This can be applied to just, your lives in so many, many different ways. And at this point, I could have some anxiety because I've gotten to the end of my notes, folks. I was not always the man you see now, to say the least. And in particular, I had a great deal of anxiety. And I realized early on, and I can't tell you how, but I was very young when I decided to, well, I don't mean a kid, I mean in college. Maybe I was reading, I was kind of studying psychology, and I decided that one of the things I would do when I got anxious would be to say, bring it on. So I would get very anxious at night. I didn't know why then. I was able to track it back later to a very, very profound loss of the woman who actually brought me up and took care of me until she had to leave when I was 5. It wasn't my parents. And I was able to track back a lot of the anxiety to that time. And then I didn't even remember her, which made the anxiety so much more unhandleable. She went into the amnesia of childhood, the amnesia of trauma. And later I was able to meet her and verify the reality of everything that had happened when I finally recalled it. Didn't recall it until my 30s. Recalled it from a dream. Dreamed about her and couldn't figure out who she was. So, I thought I had a few more minutes to go, but I hear the wonderful music, my wonderful audience. Anxiety is not only manageable, you can learn to hardly have any that overwhelms you. You'll get signals. I had pointed out a few little signals of anxiety I got during the show. Barking dogs, woodpeckers banging. But you can live without being overwhelmed by anxiety. I hope this show has meant something to you. I hope it's helpful to you. I really do. If you're listening to this show, you're good people, you have resources, you have abilities. Take what I've communicated and make the most of your life. Thank you for listening. Thank you.